NAR and Department of Justice just screwed up big time, and unfortunately it means that it's going to become a lot harder to become a homeowner in America at a time when it's never been harder to become a homeowner in America. And I am furious about this, not because I'm a realtor, but because I actually care about America. I care about the American people. I care about our economy. I care about more people being able to actually buy real estate and achieve financial freedom and, build generational wealth for their families. And this decision, this proposed settlement that you've probably heard about, is going to make all of that incredibly more difficult. It's going to have long-ranging and long-lasting effects on our economy in a macro sense and a micro sense, and it's just horrible all around. So we're going to be talking about that in this video today. Jake Fletcher here with the Fletcher Group, your Miami realtor, as my hair is flying around in the wind here. And we're talking about the NAR settlement today, the National Association of Realtors, which is the largest trade group on planet Earth at almost 1.6 million realtors, and the Department of Justice. So there was a settlement that has been agreed on by the two parties, and now it just has to basically get approved by the courts. It's got to get rubber stamped by the courts in order for it to pass into law, which will take into effect in mid-July of this year, 2024. Now, it'll probably be no surprise to you that a lot of uninformed keyboard warriors are out there heralding this as a great victory for people because they think that the 1.6 million realtors that are out there literally do nothing at all, just collect a check, maybe open a door, incorrectly, of course, thinking that and not really understanding the full scope of what we as realtors do. However, this is not actually going to hurt realtors the most. We're going to be fine. We're going to survive. Yes, for the slackers, it's going to be harder for them, and probably a lot of realtors will get out of the business, which ultimately is not a bad thing for other realtors and for consumers, because the ones that leave will be the weak ones. But what this actually is bad for is for the little guy, okay? And you won't be surprised to learn, probably, because it seems to be the ever continuing story in this country that the decisions that are passed down from above never really do benefit the little guy. They never really benefit the medium guy, the middle class. I mean, the middle class is basically dead in this country now. So it's no surprise to see that this newest proposed settlement is not actually in favor of the little guy or buyers or really sellers either, but it's being passed off in the media as you've probably seen headlines of, oh, it's going to be cheaper to buy a home and it's going to be easier. All of that is honestly bullshit. But of course, the media always does their good job of doing their spin game. So what does this actually mean? What's actually happening? Well, without going into too much of the legal nitty-gritty, I'm going to tell you about the two most important things as it relates to you as a consumer, which is the people who are generally watching my videos are consumers. One of the things is it's going to now make it so that you're no longer allowed to list a buyer's agent compensation on the MLS, okay? So once this settlement is approved, there will no longer be allowed to be an offer of buyer's agent compensation on the MLS. So agents will essentially have to call other agents and see, hey, what's the compensation, get it in writing ahead of time or something. And the second thing that really matters to consumers is that now this is going to require, if you want to work with a buyer's agent, every single buyer's agent across the country is now going to be required to have a written agreement with their clients before they even open the first door, okay? So this is going to be, probably one of the things that's actually for the better, because for a long time, I wouldn't do buyer's agency agreements with people because I learned that it tends to scare people off more than it actually ends up helping me. And at the end of the day, the value that I'm providing to people is why they stick around, not because they signed some piece of paper. So we're gonna go into more of the details about what does this all mean in a second, but first I wanted to share one other detail of the suit is that NAR is agreeing, National Association of Realtors is agreeing to pay $418 million to settle this suit and other copycat lawsuits. So another sort of bright side is that hopefully once this all gets passed, this sort of up in limbo sort of situation or status that we've been in for a few years regarding these lawsuits will hopefully finally come to an end, and we can have certainty about how the industry is going to be actually moving forward. Now, how did this all come about? Like, why did this even start to become a thing? Well, what happened was essentially there was certain brokerages, certain offices of brokerages that were out there, and they were essentially lying to people. And they were saying, hey, we have to do the listing at X percent, right? Or, we're required to do 6%, or we're required to do 5%. And in reality, commissions have always been, still are, and will always continue to be negotiable. But there was certain, home sellers that weren't aware of that. And then they took those brokerages to court. They took NAR to court. They took everybody to court. And, it ended up in this settlement. Now, the reality is, in my opinion, it shouldn't have ever been an industry-wide suit. It should have been, hey, those bad actors should have gotten taken to court. They should have gotten sued for what they did, and they should have taken their medicine, and taken it like a, proverbially take their medicine like a man, right? And leave the rest of us who have been doing our jobs dutifully and diligently out of it, okay? But that's not what ended up happening, and, NAR is essentially, in my opinion, is throwing realtors under the bus in order to stop the suits and, sort of save themselves from, further decimation, as it were. Man, it is a windy day here, but it's still beautiful in Miami. Even if there's not a ton of sun and there's a little bit too much wind, the temperature's perfect and it's beautiful here. So how is this proposed settlement actually going to hurt first-time buyers, low-income buyers, and just buyers in general? Well, essentially, if you're looking to buy real estate right now, you're gonna have three options in front of you. Either pay for buyer's agency representation, which is definitely recommended if you can afford it. You can also choose to only look at properties that the seller is offering some level of buyer agency compensation so that the agent you're working with can get compensated for the work that they're doing. Or you can go straight to the listing agent as an unrepresented buyer and potentially get absolutely obliterated. Another thing too is with the requirement of having to sign a buyer's agency agreement, what about buyers that sign a buyer's agency agreement and don't read carefully what they're signing and end up locked into an agreement with an agent that isn't pulling their weight? Let's be honest here. The elephant in the room is all realtors are not created equal, okay? There's about 10% of us who are out there actually producing, doing volume, and know what we're doing, know the contracts inside and out, backwards and forwards, and are experts in real estate. There's about 40%, I'd say, that are average. They probably don't know a ton about the contracts, and they're not super savvy, but they can get a transaction closed, most likely. Okay, and then there's another 50% that are like part-time agents that are just absolute hot garbage and have no business representing people in the biggest transaction of their lives, okay? So, if buyers go and sign a buyer's agency agreement with one of those type of agents, or even an average agent, and they just aren't feeling like they're getting what they're paying for, but they've signed an agreement for a year, it's gonna lead to a lot of sticky situations. The good news is that a lot of those garbage agents are gonna end up getting pushed out of the industry because they're just not gonna be able to cut it, all right? So that's good for the consumer, and honestly, it's good for agents like myself as well when there's less competition, even though those people might be doing one deal every 2 years. If you average out hundreds of thousands of those people, that's a lot more deals for the agents that actually know what we're doing. So it's probably better for the industry overall. It's definitely better for consumers, and it's probably better for the optics of realtors and public perception of realtors, because now it'll be easier to actually find professionals that know what they're doing. But the bad news is, like I was saying, there's gonna be some buyers that get stuck in some agency agreements with agents that they probably don't end up wanting to work with, which kind of sucks for them. Now, the other downside of this for buyers that go unrepresented to listing agents directly is, you wanna go against me? I'm like Ari Gold in Entourage, okay? I'm an absolute savage. I'm gonna run absolute circles around you, okay? And this doesn't mean that anything unethical is happening. It just means that if you're a regular Joe and you're coming against a professional negotiator, those professional negotiators are going to absolutely trounce you. I'm going to get you to pay so much more for that property. I'm gonna make my seller so much more money, it's not even funny, okay? And again, it's nothing unethical happening, but I have a fiduciary responsibility to my seller. That's who I'm working for, okay? So I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure that I make them the most money possible in that transaction. And if that means that, a buyer comes in unrepresented and doesn't know what they're doing and pays more than the property's worth, hey, so be it. I did my job, That buyer chose not to get buyer representation, okay? And another thing too is almost every single unrepresented buyer that has ever come for one of my listings fails, okay? I actually went and looked back and tried to calculate this. Over 95% fail rate of buyers, unrepresented buyers coming and not end up winning the listing, okay, or winning the sale, okay? The reason for that is very simple, because if you're just an average Joe like that, you don't know the contracts, you don't know the deadlines, you don't know the terms, there's so many things that go into a successful transaction that you're not aware of, and you're just simply not going to either provide the right information in the offer and not even get it accepted in the first place, or you're going to miss out on specific important deadlines and you're going to get your escrow money taken. So that's another thing, is a lot of people are going to be losing escrow money over this. There's actually been quite a few times that I've had those unrepresented buyers come, and they're really lovely people, and I want them to get the property, like a lovely young couple, or, certain situations where I was actually rooting for them, but there's nothing I can do because I'm hired by the seller. I can't stop the train wreck from happening. I'm literally paid to not stop the train wreck from happening, okay? So, even if you have the most ethical and well-meaning, good, spirited listing agent, they can't do anything to help you as an unrepresented buyer, okay? Their interest is for the seller who's hiring them to sell their property, okay? And another thing too is, not every seller is going to want their listing agent to represent those buyers, okay? For me personally, I feel like I'm able to do it in an ethical way. I've done, transactions where I've represented both sides, and, at the end of the day, I'm brokering the deal, okay? I'm not gonna make things unfair for one party or the other. I'm there to facilitate a mutual agreement of how to transact a piece of real estate. But not every seller is going to love the idea of having their listing agent represent the buyer, because at the end of the day, this is a business transaction. This is one of their biggest, if not biggest, transactions of their lives. So, having the person brokering that deal representing the buyer is not necessarily going to be every seller's first preference of situations, okay? Now, one thing I can tell you for sure is not everybody is ethical, okay? Not everybody is like me or has the same type of, morals or judgment, and not everybody's going to behave in an ethical way. There is going to be people who take advantage of buyers, okay? Now, there's a billion different ways that this can happen, but I just want to share with you guys, one example of how this can happen, how a listing agent might be able to take advantage of a buyer in this new situation, okay? So let's say you have an unrepresented buyer, they come to the property and they say, hey, listing agent, I just want to work directly with you, let's make the deal happen, okay? And then the unscrupulous listing agent, let's call him Mr. Sketchy. So Mr. Sketchy, he says, okay, Mr. Buyer, sounds good. But right now we've actually got multiple offers on this property. We've got 3 different offers, and let's say the property is listed at $500,000. And they say, well, we've got 3 different offers, and they're all over asking. We've got one at $550 is the highest. So in order to beat that offer, you're gonna have to come in at $550. And hey, I recommend actually also doing an escalation clause. That way, if somebody comes in higher, then you can still get the property. And let's say the escalation clause goes up to $575,000, okay? Now, if that buyer doesn't know any better, that listing agent, Mr. Sketchy, comes back to them and they say, hey, Mr. Buyer, we actually did have another offer come in at $574. So your $575 automatically kicks in. You're now under contract for this property at $575,000. And by the way, because you didn't know any better about having an appraisal contingency, even if it appraises low, you're gonna be on the hook for the difference between what it appraises for and the $575,000, okay? Now that buyer, they don't know the contracts. They don't know, they're not a real estate expert, okay? So not only do they not know to ask the listing agent for proof of the competing offer, even if they do know to ask the listing agent for proof of the competing offer, they're not gonna know that when that listing agent only sends them page 1 that has the price, they're not gonna know that that listing agent is actually supposed to send them the full offer with the buyer's name redacted. Why do they do that? I've done this a million times, because then if I'm the buyer's agent or the buyer, you can call that other agent who wrote that competing offer and verify that it was actually a legitimate offer and not complete bullshit, okay? So, this is just one example of literally infinite things that can happen of how people are definitely going to take advantage of if this new proposed settlement goes into place, okay? So you guys gotta understand, all the people that are hooting and hollering from the rooftops about, oh, this is the downfall of realtors. When I became a realtor, I was surprised at how inspirational, so many people in the realtor community are, and how hardworking and such good people there are that actually care about their clients and want the best for their clients, and people, I think, overlook that and think that realtors are just all about the money. Well, guess what? It's a business, okay? People provide a service in order to make money and survive and provide for their families. This is not news, okay? There's a reason why different professions exist, okay? You're not gonna go represent yourself in court. You're not gonna go do your own mammogram. You're not gonna go, try to fix your own engine of your car unless you have that skill set, I guess, but there's a reason why certain professions exist, and I think people forget that because, admittedly, like I said earlier, there are some bad actors in the space. There's people who don't know what they're doing and probably shouldn't be in the business, but that doesn't mean that the industry, needs to change forever, and buyers and, should be put in a position of being, handicapped essentially against sellers. Now you might say, Jake, hold on a second, sellers shouldn't have to pay the buyer's agent commission. The buyer should have to pay for their own representation. That doesn't make any sense to have sellers pay that. Well, 2 things, okay? Number 1, the sellers never had to pay that in the first place. It has always been up to sellers what they want to offer for compensation, if anything, to a buyer's agent, okay? They've always been able to offer anywhere from 0 to theoretically 100% commission if they wanted to, okay? Now, another thing too is that the buyers have traditionally, when a buyer either finances or is paying cash for a property, the funds that are paid by the buyer go to the seller, and then the seller pays them out to the brokerage. So, whether the deal is cash or finance, that money is coming from the buyer's side anyways, okay? It just happens that now the buyer's not going to be able to finance that amount. They're gonna have to front load it, which is gonna make things extremely difficult for anyone who is a low income buyer or just barely, scraping their 2 cents together to be able to actually purchase a home. okay? So, you know, it's a disaster for those people. It's a disaster for anyone who doesn't have a rich uncle who has left them an inheritance, basically, or doesn't have large amounts of cash laying around, right? I'm being a little facetious about the rich uncle, but you get the point, you know? Anyone who's a little strapped for cash, I mean, if you're watching this video and you own a home, you probably remember your first home sale and how strapped for cash you were after that closing, okay? Imagine having to pay buyer's agency commission on top of that. It probably might have prevented you from actually being able to make that purchase in the first place. Another thing too is, as I cross the street here, is how are appraisals gonna work now, okay? Because if you think about it, you know, if a seller is not offering buyer's agency compensation, then that's gonna have to be reflected in the appraisal versus all the other homes that are being used as comparable sales that did sell with buyer's agency compensation. And sellers want to get the full appraised value for their homes, right? So, you know, how's that going to happen now if automatically, you know, if you're not offering buyer's agency compensation, that's gonna be an automatic some percentage off of the value of that transaction, you know, typically between 2 to 3%, you know, because I mean, generally commissions are anywhere from 4 to 6% on average, right? So that's how, you know, they're usually split in half, right? So, you know, this is going to be a disaster for appraisals too. And that's something that I don't really hear a lot of people talking about because, you know, it's a proposed settlement. A lot of it is still unclear exactly how it's going to go down. And we kind of have to wait and see what gets dictated from the top. But it's looking kind of not so clear in terms of how that stuff's going to actually work. You know, and this is something that for sale by owners, in terms of getting that automatic percentage cut off the top right away, is something that for sale by owners have had to deal with for a long time, you know. And if you've tried to sell for sale by owner, you already know when you list that property, people know you're not using an agent. So they're going to come to you automatically taking, you know, 5 or 6% off of your asking price because they're factoring in that you're not paying any commissions, right? So, you know, and by the way, you know, the stats on for sale by owners are absolutely atrocious. It's actually only 11% of for sale by owners actually end up being successful and selling the home. So that's definitely something to think about if you are thinking about selling and not offering buyer's agency compensation. You know, you're basically limiting the pool of potential buyers because there's going to be a big percentage that are only going to want to see homes that they don't have to pay a buyer's agent for. And on top of that, you're already cutting your asking price is already going to be cut down by the potential buyers who do make bids on your property. So yeah, I really don't think that NAR should have just settled this lawsuit the way that they did. I think they should have put up a better fight on behalf of consumers, on behalf of the general public, of people who may transact real estate in the future, and honestly, in behalf of their members that pay them tons of money every year, instead of throwing everybody under the bus to save from, you know, having more legal fees and having to be in court more, right? You know, they should have explained and made the Department of Justice understand the value of buyer's agency representation to home buyers, you know, as well as the many ways that this is going to end up harming the general public, you know, and elucidate the fact that sellers always will be able to, and currently right now are able to negotiate the commissions for their home, okay? They can negotiate the listing side commission with the listing agent. They can negotiate the buyer's agency compensation that the listing agent broker is going to be providing to the buyer's agent as well. Literally, this changes nothing. All it does is make it harder for buyers to buy homes, okay? Especially, like I've said a million times now, low income and first time home buyers who don't have a current property to sort of crack the piggy bank on, you know, and do a cash out refinance or pull out a HELOC to be able to buy their next home. If you don't have that real estate piggy bank to crash open, you know, and take that equity out to buy another property, then, you know, you're at a distinct disadvantage from other people who do have that option. One of the last things here that I wanted to talk about is this proposed settlement is most definitely going to result in untold amounts of lawsuits that result out of this, okay, that spring out of this. I feel like, honestly, in my opinion, I think they're going to have to create a whole new real estate court system to handle all of the lawsuits that spring out of this, from every single direction, because it's just a disaster every single way that you slice it and dice it. It's gonna make things way more complicated. And honestly, that's not even the worst part. Like I said, there's gonna be people who get taken advantage of, and that's where these lawsuits are going to be springing out of, because, let's face it, there are unscrupulous people, whether they be, the agents themselves or the sellers or, people who are going in unrepresented in transactions. People are people, and they don't always do things right, and our court systems are already backlogged. So this is just gonna make that worse, honestly, and who does this benefit, by the way? Like I said at the beginning, it doesn't benefit the little guy. If you guessed BlackRock, Starwood Capital, Brentwood, all these big real estate investment firms, you guessed right, because now those firms have less competition to buy single family homes in America. And BlackRock alone, just BlackRock, guys, owns 6.7% of all real estate listed for rent in the United States. Okay, so imagine now compounding that across all the other real estate investment firms that own property out there, and things are looking pretty bleak for the average American. So, way to go, Department of Justice, way to go, NAR, way to go, Wind, that's giving me an Ace Ventura right now. You love to see it. But this is what's happening, and I wanted to give you guys the actual facts about what's going down, because I've seen so much misinformation out there, disinformation, people just doing, certain titles and putting information out there just to get clicks and likes and sensationalism. What else is new, right? But I wanted to give you guys the real facts, because that's what I've always done on my channel. I'm the realtor who will literally tell people, hey, I personally would not buy this house, right? So I always make it a point to put people over profits and put the relationships that I have with people over any transaction or any commission or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, this is a people business, it's a relationship business, and the relationships that I build with people are what I've built my career on, okay? So I've always come correct, always come honest, and giving you guys exactly what I think on my channel, and that's why I wanted to do this video, to continue to do that, continue to share the actual facts about these monumental changes that are coming in the industry. So if you appreciate that, if you like the fact that I always keep it 100 with you guys, give me a 100 on the like button right there. Hit subscribe, make sure to ring the bell so you don't miss videos like this in the future. And of course, reach out to me about anything and everything to do with Miami real estate. Jake Fletcher, your Miami real estate agent here with eXp Realty and the Fletcher Group. And it's a pleasure, and I'll see you guys on the next one.